Mark chapter 10, verses 35 and 45, verses 35 through 45 this morning. And we're going to talk about heroes of the kingdom, what it means to be a hero in God's kingdom, because that's what some of Jesus' disciples are going to ask for today, in a sense. So if you read with me, we're in Mark 10, and we'll start here in verse 35. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" And they said to him, "We are able." And Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Let's pray. God, thank you for your word. Thank you that it's true. Thank you that it gives us hope. Thank you that it corrects us. Thank you that it helps us live this life in a way that points others to you. I ask your blessing on my mouth this morning, that you help me to speak your words and to lift you up. In Jesus' name, amen. So out in our gym that we have on campus at our property north of St. Louis, my boys will regularly holler the name of some NBA star and then shoot or lay up, see if I can make it down these steps, using their best imitation of how that particular man handles the ball. And sometimes they'll even shoot like Lonzo Ball, which any NBA fans will tell you that's crazy. And they'll even make it like that, which is crazier. Not all of these men that they'll imitate, Derrick Rose or Steph Curry, are heroes to my boys, but some of them definitely are. So I'm going to ask some of them and see if they can give for you who each other's heroes are. Avante, can you give me Wisdom's hero or one of them? James Harden. Michael, can you give me Avante's hero?
Derrick Rose.
Okay. That's not what I would have picked, but you're probably right. Iggy, can you give me Wisdom's? Oh, shoot, I already asked Wisdom's. Michael's. That's what I would have said. Wisdom, can you give me Iggy's? All right. Well, I would have picked LeBron James for Avante, so I didn't quite nail it maybe. But heroes are become evident, who we look up to in different areas of life. That's just one area of life to look up to people at. Become evident. And there are a lot of different heroes, different types of heroes, in different walks of life. Now, some may not look at all these different categories that I'm about to list as heroes, and that's fine. I'm not arguing for that. Not everyone's going to agree that an athlete or an actor should be a hero. But what I do want to try and agree with you on is how heroes get treated. what being a hero looks like, not just in our culture, but I believe pretty universally. So, name for me some people who are famous for their intelligence. Would anybody be willing to throw somebody out there who's just well known because they're super smart? Utah? Thanos? Okay, an unusual form of smart. Bill Gates, yeah, famous because he's very smart. Einstein? Avante? Stephen Hawkins, okay, he was the one on my list. I didn't come up with as many as have been thrown out. Wisdom? Bill Nye, yeah. Okay, how about for their compassion? For their charity? Mother Teresa, yeah, she's on my list. Anybody else? Gandhi? Okay, how about for their athletic talent? I guess we've nailed that one already. How about for, like, and this one's hard maybe, but elite skills, people who, because of their talents in other areas of life, medicine, physics, anything else like that, where they're working with their hands, but with very elite skills. Can anybody give me? Ben Carson? He's on my list, yep. I didn't. Bob Ross, okay, you got me. How about for their courage? People who stood up for something when it was tough. On my list, yep. George Washington, okay, not on my list, but yeah. I threw out Martin Luther King Jr., Douglas MacArthur, if anybody's familiar with him from World War II, I'm sure some are. So, lots and lots of different heroes for lots of different reasons. And some of these people you could definitely call celebrities, maybe not so much heroes in some senses of the word. But here's the point. And for most of these people that we've listed, this came true during their lifetime. Heroes, when heroes are recognized by our culture, there's four things that I thought of that come along with being a hero. And that is that, oh, it's not up here. Okay, I'll just list them off for you. I thought it was up here. Heroes are listened to. They have an audience. When they talk, people pay attention. Heroes are respected. Some heroes or celebrities are very controversial and not necessarily respected, but many of them are respected, at least by a lot of people. Heroes are definitely imitated. Heroes for good, heroes for bad are even imitated. We see that tragically, or I should say famous people for bad are often imitated. And they're usually wealthy, or at least they can lead a comfortable life if they choose to. They don't often live lives of poverty, with maybe a few exceptions. So we read this morning about two men who I would say have decided they're going to be runners-up for like big-time hero in the faith in Jesus' kingdom. And they say, hey, we want to be recognized for this. We don't want to really be unsung heroes. We'd rather be sung heroes. And so they come to Jesus and say, hey, can we sit when you come back in your glory, when you come back as king, when you come back to reign endlessly for eternity? We would like to be on your right hand and left, kind of be recognized for our commitment, our sacrifice, for everything that we're doing for you. So, James and John ask a confused question. They ask for recognition. I think it's interesting that the way that they ask him is a very childish way. They basically say, promise me you'll do something for me. I imagine any of us in here have probably been asked one of those, just promise me, tell me you'll do whatever I ask you to do right now. And that's how they come to him. A positive thing in here, I skipped ahead. A positive thing in here is at least they are asking for an eternal reward or recognition, at least their minds going that far ahead. A lot of times I don't think we necessarily get beyond this day or this week in terms of what our goals for ourselves are as far as how we want to be treated. So they're thinking way ahead, which is probably the one good thing you can say about these guys with this question. The first thing Jesus tells them, and this is kind of where we think of the confused question, is you guys don't even know what you're asking for. As we talked in Bible Guys, some of the things that were thrown out is this would be like one of us in this room walking up to LeBron James and saying, hey, can I be your point guard for the Lakers? Or walking up to our president and saying, hey, can I be the vice president? Or maybe walking up to Batman and saying, hey, can I replace Robin? I think I'm qualified. So these guys are like, they're out of the ballpark with their question, and they don't even realize it. The next thing we see is that Jesus tells them they have come up with a very costly goal. Now, Jesus doesn't answer them directly. In fact, he never does, and I think that's on purpose. But he answers their question with a question. He says, my page flipped. He says in verse 38, are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? Now, I'm thinking that this is Jesus' way of saying no. As I initially go through this passage, I'm like, okay, this is the shutdown question. They're going to say, no, we can't share in your cup and your baptism. Then he's going to say, well, there's your answer, no. But that's not what happens at all. First, these guys say yes, they can do that. And then, even more surprisingly, Jesus agrees with them. Verse 39, he says, the cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. So that had me really confused, and I had to do a lot of digging on what is this cup and this baptism. And so looked at some other commentaries or messages on this and talked to Bible guys. And there are a lot more ideas out there than I felt like I could nail down well enough to share with you. But the basic idea behind this cup and baptism is a really simple idea, but a really weighty idea, and it's well shown in the picture of baptism. That is a life of sacrifice or of dying to myself, and that's the picture of going under in the waters of baptism, is that as it were being buried to living for yourself. And then as the person is raised out of the water of baptism, the idea of pursuing God's goals instead, or being alive to God, whereas before we were alive to ourselves and dead to God, now we are dead to self as Christians and alive to God instead. Another thing it means is sharing life with Jesus. He said, can you do these things with me? A life of oneness with Jesus here on this earth. But here I think it's important to look at the context. These guys seem to miss it when he said, can you share life with me? Can you do life alongside of me? If you look back in Mark chapter 10 to verses 33 and 34, what has Jesus just said? He said, see, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise. So when Jesus says, are you really wanting to rub shoulders with me in this life? Here he is a month or so, probably less, away from all these events. If they had realized fully what Jesus was asking, they would have said, do I really want to be one with Jesus? Do I really want to share this life with him quite so much? So it seems to me that as Jesus says, can you share my cup? Can you share my baptism? His goal is to make these guys realize or help them realize. You want the recognition of being my disciple. You want to be looked at as a hero as I come back eternally, but you haven't counted the cost yet of what it means to be that close to me. You don't realize what following me in this life looks like fully. The next thing we see in the story is 12 unhappy disciples. So the other 10 jump in, they're listening, and maybe they think based on Jesus' answer that these guys are getting a sort of maybe yes. You're like, wait a minute, he didn't say no. Are these guys really getting what they just asked for? So the other 10 apostles jump in and are quite upset. It says they began to be indignant at James and John. And I think you could go one of two ways with this, and it's obvious as you continue reading which way to go. One is maybe they're saying, how could you two consider yourselves so important as compared to Jesus? You know, maybe they're echoing what Jesus just said. You guys don't know what you're asking. How can you put yourself on such a close plane with Jesus, saying we deserve to be at your right hand and your left hand for eternity? The other thing that they could be asking or saying as they're getting upset is, you two think you're more important than the other 10 of us? You know, 2 of us 12 are going to be in this position. You know, why should it be you two? How dare you put yourself up here? The rest of us are just as good as you. So Jesus is going to respond to the disciples, and we'll get back to the text to see his response, and make it clear that the rest of the 10, meaning all 12 of them together, are in this same ego trip, self-focused boat on a trip together, and focusing on themselves being recognized, on themselves being appreciated and admired, rather than placing themselves below each other. So if you come back to Mark 10, verses 42 through 45. So Jesus called them to him, that's all the disciples, and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. So that's the normal kingdom look here on earth. But it shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So as we continue on, we're going to look at 2 things here in this story. First, who is Jesus in the story? And then next we'll answer the question, what is the gospel in this story? The first thing that I see for who is Jesus is patient and humble. Jesus is the only one out of this group of 13 that is not on an ego trip at the moment, and he never was. And yet, even though he's surrounded by these guys who probably should know better by now, and who are placing themselves so similarly on this level with Jesus, who should be so far above them in their minds. Despite that, he never gets angry. He never speaks harshly with them in this story, and I think that's amazing and convicting to me. Instead, Jesus takes this moment and re-explains, as he has before, he explains a lesson to these guys of humility and patience. As we think about the humility, I think it's amazing that when James and John ask Jesus, can we sit on your right hand and your left? He's humble enough to say, that's not even mine to give. Here he is, the Son of God. He is coming back as the King of the universe, who will reign in glory instead of reigning in poverty as he is right now. And yet he is acknowledging the limits of his own authority, even as the rest of his disciples are speculating wildly about how important they are. It makes me wonder how many times I ask God for something that I think I deserve, that I think, I should be able to get this, and God's like, One of my pastors previously said sometimes God says yes to our prayers, and sometimes he says no to our prayers, and sometimes he says, "You've got to be kidding me," to our prayers. And I think he said that to me before. The next thing that I see, and I think this is one of the main points of this story, if not the driving point, is that Jesus is the actual hero in this story among a group of guys who all want to be looked at as the hero. Now, Jesus is the hero. He humbly says that. He says, "I'm the example here for you guys," and what it means. But Jesus is the hero of an upside-down kingdom, just like what we watched in that video a few moments ago. And that becomes really clear if you look at the life of Jesus as a whole, which we've explored much of it in the past year going through the book of Mark. But you remember, heroes are listened to when they're recognized. Heroes are respected when they're recognized. They're imitated. Boy, Jesus wasn't imitated today. He had a bunch of guys doing the opposite of his example. And heroes can lead comfortable lives, and Jesus lived anything but that. He told people that he didn't even have a pillow to put his head on at night. So for Jesus to be the hero means that being a hero in his kingdom is not what these guys think it is. It's not this life of ease. It's not this life where you get to be on top if you happen to get in on the ground floor with Jesus. He explains that waiting on others to lift you up and make sure your wants and your needs are met first is what happens in earthly kingdoms, and earthly kingdoms don't have it right. Jesus is having an upside-down kingdom, as one of our guys in Bible guys pointed out, because the earth was already turned upside down back at the fall. Everything that we naturally do tends to be the opposite of what it should be. And so in Jesus' kingdom, things are being set right. In Jesus' upside-down kingdom, people who want to be the leaders will serve others instead. And that's not a normal leader thing in this world. In Jesus' upside-down kingdom, people who want to be first will put themselves in the position of slave. Jesus uses this word, and that means your desires are the last ones on the totem pole. They're down at the bottom. Your desires get satisfied last when you're a slave. And people in Jesus' upside-down kingdom, and that's you and me if we're saved, will do this because this is exactly what Jesus himself did. Go back to verse 45, please, with me, of Mark 10. "For even the Son of Man came not to be served." In other words, that was never his goal in his entire time here, was never to be served by others, "but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." So, Jesus is patient and humble, and Jesus is the real hero who sets an incredible and somewhat painful example for the rest of us who have joined his upside-down kingdom. What is the gospel? Meaning, what is the good news for you and me about what Jesus did in this particular story? What's the hope? What's the encouragement out of this? For one thing, the gospel in this story is service. Jesus lived a perfect life and left a perfect example by serving others instead of demanding to be served. He was the only human in history, let alone these 13 guys, including himself. He was the only human ever in history who actually deserves to have people serve him. He deserved to be celebrated. He deserved to have the easy life, to have all of his desires granted, and yet Jesus lived his whole life with the mentality not of a celebrity, which he could have, but the mentality of a servant. The next thing that we see is the gospel in this passage is sacrifice. Service and sacrifice really go hand in hand. Service isn't natural. It involves sacrifice always. And Jesus said that he came to serve and to give his life. When I read this, it seemed very natural that Jesus said he came to serve, he came to give his life as a ransom for many. And I think for myself, and maybe for some of you as well, we make Jesus giving his life away as this impersonal and robotic act that he did. Well, of course he gave his life away. Of course he served others his whole life. That's what he came to do. We almost make it easy in our minds for Jesus to go to the cross. We think of it as being easy for him to give his life away even to the point of death, but it wasn't. If you read Jesus' prayer right before his trial, in which he ends up being convicted and executed, he says, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, not what I want, but what you will." And Jesus meant exactly what he said. Jesus was a real human with real desires, with real emotions, and this sacrifice was in conflict with those real desires and emotions. Jesus didn't want to give up his life, but he counted the cost, as he's now asking the disciples to do, and he decided to pay the cost, thankfully. So it's very good news that Jesus served us and that Jesus sacrificed for us, that he counted the cost and decided to go forward. So what now? How does this affect how you and I live? Well, Jesus never did answer the original question in the passage, and like I said, I believe that's on purpose because the focus of the question was off. What he did make clear is that heroes in this upside-down kingdom are not going to be all about themselves. Heroes in the upside-down kingdom are going to be all about Jesus and imitating him. They're going to live like Jesus, and they're going to live for the glory of Jesus, not themselves, and they're going to do all this with the help of Jesus and not on their own. Each one of us in this room who is a believer has been saved by the only way that was possible, and that is for the real hero of history, the only capital H hero of history, to serve us and to sacrifice himself for us. And now he's asking us this same question that he asked the disciples, and they didn't get it at the time. But will you follow the example that I am setting for you, that I'm about to set for you even more on the cross? Will you lay down your life in service and in self-sacrifice, and by doing that, help to spread the very gospel that saved you? He's asking, will you sacrifice your desire to be first? Will you sacrifice your desire to be wealthy, to be comfortable, to lead an easy life? Will you sacrifice your desire to be admired by others? Will you sacrifice your desire to have an audience, to have people listen to you and appreciate you? Will you sacrifice even your desire to be respected by the people around you? I hope that each of us took these questions seriously enough to say, I might not want to do this. That doesn't really sound great. James and John said no at first. As we finish this story in just maybe a month from this question that Jesus asks, Jesus is arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, and they run away. And they watch from a safe distance while Jesus is convicted and mocked and spit on and whipped horribly and killed, executed for the sins of James and John and of you and me. The fact, though, that these guys said no, the fact that they failed, the fact that they betrayed Jesus, gives me a lot of hope, because as we finish the story and look farther into these guys' lives, we see that this group, in fact all 11, with the exception of Judas, are given grace. They're forgiven for their betrayal of Jesus. They're restored, and they're asked the same question again. And the next time, they ultimately say yes to Jesus. James was executed by one of the Herods because he lived his life for Jesus. 10 of the apostles, including him, were martyred according to church history, and James, one of these two brothers, was the first of those 10. Historical records tell us as well that John is later tortured severely for his faith, unimaginably, and then eventually dies in exile on an island near modern-day Turkey, alone as far as we know. Not including Judas the betrayer, John was the only apostle who did not die for Jesus, but he definitely lived a life of self-sacrifice for Jesus. And that's because of God's restoring grace. That's because of God's forgiveness and second chances that he extends as well to you and me. I have said no to this question many times. I have refused, maybe knowingly, maybe carelessly, to lay down my life and serve him in very small ways and in very big ones. But Jesus offers me, and he offers you, that same forgiveness that he offered to James and John, and that same second chance to say yes the next time we're asked by him, will you serve me? Will you sacrifice your own goals, your own natural desires, and follow my example that I'm setting for you? That's the challenge for each one of us for this week. And for nobody greater than myself, because I share this today not having arrived. I'm just telling you what Jesus did and what I want to do to follow him, and what I hope that all of us who are his children choose to do the next time we get a chance, because there will be a chance this week. You'll have a chance to serve. You'll have a chance to sacrifice this week. Thank you.